All right, so this was a really fun interview. Quick intro here. This is Thomas Mahler. He is the CEO of Moon Studios. They most notably did Ori and the Blind Forest and its sequel, Will o' the Wisp. So like 15 million copies combined. So it's a fairly large success story for their studio. He also said a while back that they were getting into an ARPG, which is No Rest for the Wicked, they're now developing, and they said it was sort of a make or break game development for them as they're an indie studio. They also bought back their publishing rights from their publisher that was selling off the company as they wanted to remain independent. So this is kind of an interesting interview in which I ask him sort of about the philosophies of developing the game, but also the history of Moon Studios and the company in general. So enjoy this interview. With that being said, here you go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special interview with Thomas Mahler. He is the co-founder and CEO of Moon Studios, an independent video game company that was founded in 2010 and is most notable recently for the Ori series, which I believe at this point has sold over 15 million copies. So thank you, Thomas, for taking the time to come on and chat today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm going to get it right started here with a kind of the obvious question, which is you guys had a game right out of the gate, massive success, independent game of Ori and the Blind Forest. And then you guys decided to, make an ARPG. So I guess my question for you is, what was the catalyst that really drove that? Was it personal inspiration and enjoyment from other games? Or what was the process of coming to decide we're going to make an ARPG?
Well, the way I always approach this is I just look at the market and I look at what is our team and what am I passionate about, right? So for Ori and the Blind Forest and the Ori series in general, the way this unfolded was I was just a huge fan of Metroidvanias, right? When I grew up, I played Super Metroid and Symphony of the Night and so on. And I just love these fucking games, right? Even back then on the PlayStation 1, right? When early 3D games were all the rage, right? Castlevania Symphony of the Night came out, was a 2D game, but it was the best fucking game, one of the best fucking games on the PlayStation, right? So I loved that. But then what happened is that Metroidvanias really just disappeared, right? For a long time. Like all the 3D Castlevania stuff was not a Metroidvania anymore. And then the Igarashi Castlevanias were all just relegated to the Game Boy, right? And it's like nobody made a AAA Metroidvania for a long time and like wouldn't dare to touch that stuff, right? So I was at Blizzard back then. And I was working on StarCraft 2, Wings of Liberty and so on, right? And I saw, like, while that was happening, the whole XBLA market exploded, right? So Braid came out, Castle Crashers came out, all these Super Meat Boy and so on came out and so on. And all these games came out, and suddenly, like, bedroom coding was a thing again, right? And I was just, oh my God, that would be the coolest fucking thing. Imagine we could make games again with, like, 5 to 10 people or something, right? And, like, do something different and unique. Because what I saw back then was during the PlayStation 2 and GameCube days and Xbox One days and so on, right? Like normal, like these more experimental games kind of like really went away, right? Like you needed at least like a couple $1 million to get into retail. And so XBLA changed that and kind of like made indie games a thing again, right? Like really turned it into a business. So I just basically quit and was like, okay, we'll try this thing, right? Like, here's a little prototype. I sent that to EA and Microsoft and all of those, like Activision, etc. And then Microsoft were the party that really understood what we were doing here. And then that created Ori, right? Like, then we basically created Ori with them. And then even after Blind Forest, once Blind Forest was done and I had all my design stuff ready, I just sat down and was inspired by, look, I see Ori as our Mario because it's very platforming focused, right? So the idea was, man, wouldn't it be fucking great if Moon Studios would make their own Zelda, right? Similar to the analogy of like Miyamoto, right? Where in 85 or something, he did Super Mario Bros. And then in 86, he did Zelda on the NES, right? And I wanted to take that same angle. But then when I made that prototype for No Rest for the Wicked, that was in December of 2016, by the way.
Wow, way back.
It just became very clear that, oh my God, we could turn this into something crazy, right? We don't even just have to do a top-down action adventure or something. We could turn this into a massive fucking ARPG. Because the other thing that happened was that I was a huge fan, obviously, of Diablo 2, right? So in the early 2000s, I played it with my buddy, and I was just already amazed, right? And was like, Jesus Christ, if Diablo 2 represents the games that we're playing today, imagine what we'll be playing 5 or 10 years later, right? And then Diablo 3 came out, and to me, that was always a step back. compared to Diablo 2, right? Like in many ways, it kind of like streamlined the experience. It made it more arcadey. It just turned everything hyper, right? It made it more super fast paced and so on. It basically focused on what's the end game experience for Diablo 2 and turned that into the norm, right? And to me, that was always, I'm with David Brevik on this, right? I always felt like that got really kind of like tangled up a little bit, right? Like that was, like to me, the early game experience of Diablo 2 is what the game is probably supposed to be, right? Where it's like, it's methodical. You really have to think about the build. You really have to be, like really understand how the itemization works and all of that stuff, right? And so with Wicked, the whole idea was we will do for ARPGs what we did with Metroidvanias, right? That we look at what is the genre right now. Let's rip it all up, right? Is point and click combat still the best thing that you could do? Or could you go with a system that is more akin to what Monster Hunter did with an animation control combat system, right? With what Dark Souls did, where you just give the player a lot more control over the character, right? And same thing with all of that. I basically had this whole thing in mind of hey, Wicked should become this amalgamation of here's a Moon Studios thing that is Diablo mixed with Zelda, mixed with we take the exploration stuff from Zelda, but we take the itemization and the retention stuff from Diablo. We take the combat system more from games like Dark Souls and Monster Hunter and so on, right? And then we wanted to have these more social elements in there as well from stuff like Stardew Valley and so on. Because that's my thing with ARPGs. A lot of times, there's just this one core game loop, right? And that to me can get boring at times, right? So it's all just every quest is about, go kill these monsters, right? And get this stuff. And then the next thing is, and then over there is something, go kill these monsters, and then go kill these monsters, and then go kill these monsters, right? And I always wanted to have these moments in there where it's okay, you also have to let the gameplay kind of breathe out, right? So you kill these monsters, and then you walk in through the forest and something appears, right? Or there's some exploration thing that you have to do now or something, right? And then, bam, now suddenly something breaks through the wall and now you're back to combat and so on. So that there's more of a roller coaster, right? Instead of everything is up at 11 all the time, right? That it's more that. And that is really what we're trying to do with Wicked, right? We're trying to kind of really look at the genre and have to have the guts to break it up and do things that are daring, right? And that is interesting because a lot of people approach, there's a whole influx of new players that you're seeing right now that obviously come from Diablo and Souls, right? And are basically giving a shit for why isn't No Rest for the Wicked more like Diablo and Souls, right? But the whole point is, guys, we're trying something new. And by the way, we are in early access. We are fine-tuning. We're trying to use early access in the way it's meant to be, right? Where we throw something on the market, we like it, we enjoy it, it's already good, but let's actually see how the players play it, and let's tune it based on that. And that to me is really interesting, that you try to get to perfect the formula, right? Because a lot of times in game development, what happened was that, for example, with Ori, they were boxed products, right? So when we released Ori, it was always hands off. You can't change anything anymore at all, right? So a lot of times, our guys would see something on streams when people play it and so on, and we are cringing, right? Because we are oh my God, we didn't fix this one thing, and we even had that ready, and we couldn't get it in anymore, and it's the worst, right? We would love to fix it still, but there was just no money for that. There was no business sense in that, right? So with Wicked, the idea was, no, this time we'll just keep going. We'll continue to improve that, and we'll go nuts. And I mean, the other thing is we just really, I think, love a good challenge, right? So revolutionizing Metroidvanias was the first step. And then ARPGs, it's one of the most fucking complex genres that you could make, right? It's just...
And everyone wants something different,
right? Everyone wants something different. Just the insane complexity of it, right? The whole RPG systems. And then you talk about multiplayer and so on, right? It's just an incredibly complex genre. But I think over time, we will be able to hit that. We will be able to do things that I don't think Diablo, Path of Exile, and all these games will do. And that, I think, sets us up for something really good. But it'll take some time for us to fine-tune everything and to perfect it.
Speaking of challenges, has there been something in particular when you're making No Rest for the Wicked that you find to be one of your biggest obstacles that kind of keeps resurfacing? What's the largest challenge in development for the game at the moment for you?
It's just generally the systems, right? And tuning everything so that it's because it's just such a fucking complex genre, right? It's just, instead of having, here's your character that has like 5 weapons, right, or something. Even if you look at something like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth or something, right, it's like really good game. But if you look at what's the design of it, right, it's a fairly, I don't want to say simple, right, because that makes it sound like, I'm trashing it, right? But it's way more straightforward, right? With something like an ARPG, it's so fucking systemic. Everything, like all the maths behind it, everything, right? Like everything has to work, and you have like 25 different weapon archetypes, right? And all of that has to work, and everything has to be balanced. And then here's all these enemy types, and they all have to work, and they all have to scale, and all of that. It's just the sheer amount of complexity that you have, right? And like, oh my God, we have like 150 weapons now. We have like, I think like around 200 armor sets or something, right? And every single one of those has to be cool, has to be unique, has to have something. It's that. And I mean, we're still a fairly small team. We're just a team of 90 people, right? And we're trying to compete against these Goliaths, right? Of like grinding gear and Diablo and Blizzard and so on, right? Where they literally have hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, sitting there trying to do the same thing, right? And we are like, but our little 90-person team, will conquer them. So we're playing a bit of a game of David versus Goliath here.
Do you feel like, because you bring that up, so I've always just kind of wanted to ask somebody this that's in the know. Do you feel like the larger your team gets, there's a certain tipping point where it becomes too large and actually becomes harder to develop a game?
Absolutely 100%, right? So when we did Blind Forest, we were really like 5 to 10 people at best, right? And then we had some outsourcers. So with the outsourcers and with some contractors and so on, we probably got up to around 20, right? Then we made the decision, well, we'll do a sequel because that is actually a good thing for the studio right now. It would get some, money into the studio. It's fairly financially safe. Meanwhile, while we're making Ori and the Will of the Wisps, Thomas has his little side project where he can already develop No Rest for the Wicked and make a really interesting prototype that we can pitch to publishers and so on, right? And that was a fun thing to happen, right? Like in 2018, we then sat down with publishers, we showed them that, and we got a lot of, Jesus Christ, your prototype already looks better than games that I shipped, right? That was fun. But then just making the game, just really fully fleshing it out and so on, and fully fleshing out the world, writing the story, making this epic fantasy saga and so on. It's just fucking crazy. We want Wicked to become our version of, or the game version of Lord of the Rings or something like A Song of Ice and Fire or something, right? Like really an epic fantasy saga. And that's just a shit ton of work. It's just crazy.
Do you find the vision of the game as development comes, because you mentioned all this complexity around the systems, it's just a really, complex genre. Do you find yourself shifting a bit on what the original intention of the game is as you develop it and as, things arise, or do you find yourself making it, still easy to stick true to what your original implementation and vision of the game is?
No, I think my vision has never changed about Wicked, and I think you very clearly still see that, right? It is that. You have that Zelda exploration in the game. You have the ARPG systems from Diablo or something. You have the combat system from Souls in there and so on. It's more about the details, and did we make sure that all the details, every single puzzle piece really fits together, right? That's the challenge. That's always the really complex thing, right? It's never the idea, it's always the execution that's golden.
I always found this part interesting. Like, how do you navigate between, okay, this is personally what I think should be in the game, and then you'll have people that will send feedback to you. I'll just use one that's like the common one I saw in the other interviews about like fast travel, for instance, right? So how do you take feedback from people that, let's just say, even at some points are overwhelmingly saying like, here's something that, we don't like in the game or they want to be changed together. But then how do you balance that against your own concepts of the game? Like, when do you choose to bend, or when do you choose to stay true to what your belief of the game is? Like, how do you navigate that?
I always just have to ask myself, right? Like, what does my gut tell me on these things, right? And just, I mean, I'm living and breathing No Rest for the Wicked 24/7, right? I work on it 24/7. I know exactly what is in the game, what is not in the game, what should get in there, what would actually work. And a lot of times, like, you read these suggestions and they're good ideas, and then you just say, okay, yeah, that's a great idea, let's do it, right? Sometimes people just, and quite often, right, people actually just ask for, but why don't you just do the Estus system that Dark Souls has, right? And then there's always good reasons of like, well, trust me, if you can come up with some idea of like, hey, why don't you just rip off the system of some other game, right? then I guarantee you we discuss this up and down for hours and hours on end already, right? So let's take the Estus system, for example, right? That comes up again and again. Like, why don't we just rip off the Estus system from Dark Souls? Because people don't want to, collect mushrooms in the game and so on, right? And ultimately, with that, we have to design the game with 1.0 in mind and with multiplayer in mind and so on, right? And we tried this whole Estes thing, and the trouble with the Estes system is it has to be linked to respawning, right? It's a checkpoint system, right? And in that, it works really well, right? Like, it's this whole thing of like, hey, can you play through this stretch of the game with just the resources that we give you, right? With just here's your 5 Estus flasks or something, right? You have to complete the stretch until you get to the next checkpoint. And if you sit on the next checkpoint, we respawn everything, right? And that respawning thing is crucial to it, right? It only works with that. Otherwise, if you don't respawn the enemies, you could just go kill the first enemy, back to the bonfire and respawn, right? And refresh your stats, and then kill the second enemy, back to bonfire, reset, right? And you don't want that. And in multiplayer, it's even worse, right? In multiplayer, if you and me play, and you're somewhere deep in some dungeon already, right? And some random person, if you play with 4 players, right? Some random person sits down at a whisper and respawns everything around you that you just killed. That's the most fucking infuriating thing ever, right? So that system doesn't work. But the other thing that is happening right now that I'm seeing that we are really working hard to address right now is that some of the game mechanics that we have in the game, because of early access, we just have not explained properly yet. So, for example, with the mushroom thing, I think a lot of players don't know that you don't have to farm food constantly, right? There's other ways to heal. You could use the enchantments to heal, right? You could just roll a whole bunch of health enchantments and, hey, health regain on this and that. We even have the whole Bloodborne mechanic, the health rally in the game, right? So if you get the health regain enchantment, it's literally that, right? It's literally exactly what you have in Bloodborne, where it's like, if you take damage, there's a certain amount of time you have to actually regain your health, right? The other thing is there's health runes that you can use in the game, right? So the first time you get to Eleanor, she sells the heal aura, yep, right? Which you can even use in multiplayer and so on later on. And the heal aura literally changes the game, so you can just use your focus for healing, right? So you can completely cut out the whole, hey, get mushrooms and cook food and so on, right? And I think that stuff, because early access and because we had to deprioritize certain things, that's just not that well explained yet, right? Normally, like for a game like 1.0, you would have a quest in there, right? Where it's like, at first I have to do a quest with Eleanor, and then the reward is, you get a heal rune, and then obviously the player is going to use it, but we don't have that yet, right? And I think that's what's kicking us in the butt in some ways right now.
So how do you decide how to explain something to a player? For instance, like I'm thinking of back to Super Metroid. We're talking Metroidvania, and bomb jumping isn't necessarily something that's blatantly yellow paint explained to the player. It's something you find out, via practice or by accident. But yet everyone knows how to do it. So how do you, as the developer, decide when you're going to explicitly paint the yellow line? Okay, guys, here's the heal rune, here's how you make food, etc. And when do you leave room for player discovery?
Here's how I always approached it. Because I learned a long time ago through user research and so on, right, on the Ori games, it's just the fact that people don't read, right? You can put a big fucking screen there and say, hey, here's this game mechanic, here's how it works. You can even colorize the lines in the text, right? And say, do this. This is really important, right? And people just skip it, right? And just don't fucking care, right? Skip. Yeah. And so the thing I always did, and this is the thing that we still have to do for Wicked, is, so I'll give you a good example. So in Ori, for example, right? When you get the double jump, we put you into a room. The room where you get the double jump is a room you can't get out of unless you use the double jump, right? So there's a big gap that you have to jump over that you would die unless you do that, right? So, and that forces the player to learn, right? So you kind of create these head fakes on hey, I'm forcing you to learn by solving a problem in a new way, right? And that's the thing that we still have to adapt now, right? That, hey, if people don't understand the food mechanic or the heal mechanic, right? So we have to force it on them because they don't read, and a lot of players will not read. It doesn't matter if we have a huge fucking tutorial box there, right? We have to force feed them a little bit, right? And say, okay, look, The first time you get to Eleanor, there's this whole side quest, there's this whole thing that you have to do, right? And then the reward for that is, oh, you get healing, right? And now players know. So that's usually how I approach it. And regarding yellow paint, that's a good one, right? So I fucking hate yellow paint. I just think it's the stupidest thing ever, right? Like when Fable first introduced that whole, oh, by the way, we introduced this amazing system. Here's just a golden line, and you don't have to think at all anymore, and just follow this thing, and it will solve the entire game for you. That's fucking stupid. I absolutely hate it. I even in Diablo, right? I always get into these moments where it's like I literally notice when my brain shuts off and I'm just in trance mode, right? And I'm just really following the minimap, right? I'm playing the minimap. I'm not actually looking at the game. I'm just looking at where does the minimap want me to go, right? And I just don't like that kind of stuff. I really want people to think methodically, right? And really go through the game and understand what we're throwing at them, right? And sometimes that's a little bit, like more, like a lot of times people want to be able to turn their brain off, right? So you see kind of like how it's very complex, right? Like you have to make sure that you have something for all player types, right? Even for the ones that if they don't want the sophistication, okay, fuck it, here's stuff that you can do to just smash, right?
Well, I'm also thinking, back to the yellow paint thing. I've seen you mention, many times in interviews that you want it to feel like a world people are living in. Like you obviously want immersion or to actually feel like a cohesive, understandable environment, a world. And, the highlighting, I'm assuming, would also take away from a portion of that, which probably makes it even more difficult, to both point people in the right direction, but also have it be a fully inclusive world that you're kind of getting lost in.
I just think so. For example, right, if I give you a quest, right, and the quest giver says something like, oh, here's something about some treasure chest, right, and the quest guy says, oh, I dug up this I hit this chest in this place between these two palm trees somewhere on the coast, right? And then I think that is much more enticing for the player to then find out which two fucking palm trees did he mean, right? And me having to play detective, right? Rather than, oh, there's an actual line in the game that points me exactly to where that is, and let's go, right? Because that is what I'm seeing a lot of. And I think the other way, right, where players kind of have to actually solve the puzzle themselves, is, at least to me, it's way more enticing, right? So that people know that. The other thing with that is also the whole, and that's something that we're also trying to solve to some degree, right? Because the game has games have really changed once YouTube became a thing, right? Because if I give a puzzle to somebody, the most immediate response that players have if they can't find it, right? And that's hilarious to watch when you do user research or something, right? Because people immediately like, hey, and how would you solve this problem, right? Then the usual response is, I would just look it up on YouTube, right? Because the moment somebody is stuck at a puzzle in the past, right? Like you're probably a little bit younger than me, I guess, right? But in the past, we used to talk about problems in the schoolyard, right? Like, hey, I got stuck in this dungeon at Zelda, right? Like, how did you fix how did you go through the water temple and that kind of thing? And hey, can you come over and can we do it together, right? Those kind of things. But these days, it's just, no, I just quickly look it up on the internet and we're good to go, right? And so I want to get to something where these puzzles are always different for everybody, right? And these kind of setups and so on. That's why we're doing this Alive system and all of this stuff, right? There's also stuff with the Alive system that we still don't have yet that I think will be tremendously cool once we bring it in. Like once you retraverse into a zone, that's the other thing that we're doing, right? That we ask you to retraverse zones that you've already been through. That at the start, it sometimes feels alien to people, right? Because if you take Dark Souls, right, you usually play it in a way where it's like, hey, I'm in area A, I go through area A, I kill the boss, now I'm in area B. Then I go through area B, I kill the boss, now I can choose between area C or area D, right? But it's a very linear progression usually, right? And then if you go play through Dark Souls 1, there's really no fucking reason for you to ever go back to Undead Burg, right? If you're level 20, it's done, right? All the chests are open, the enemies respawn, but they're nothing, right? You one-shot them and so on. And the thing I would like to do with Wicked is that I would like to ultimately, once everything is said and done, I want the entire fucking island to be your oyster, right? I want it to always feel like there's always interesting things to come back to. You can always retraverse. There's new quests we're throwing at you. There's events that happen on the realms, right? That give you new stuff. there's always something new for you to do. And that will take some time for people to understand kind of like how it plays and how it's different than all these other games. But that I think is still a super exciting thing for us to tackle as a general game design problem.
Speaking of game design, what do you feel like you guys have nailed that you're the most proud of, that you have nailed in terms of your original design intention for No Rest for the Wicked? When I say that, is there like one thing in your mind where like, okay, we got this exactly how I had visualized it?
I think we're generally very proud of the game that we made. But I think ultimately with the way we set up combat, right? Like what I've seen in the ARPG space is that there hasn't been a lot of room for innovation, if we're honest, right? Like,
sure.
So if we look at Diablo, right? Like, cool. We are back in 1996 or something, right? Diablo comes out. And it basically starts the whole ARPG genre, right? Then Blizzard goes and streamlines the whole thing, right? And just makes a perfect sequel basically with Diablo 2, right? And then suddenly all the copycats came out, right? Everything was basically following the Diablo formula to a T. And by the way, I usually get a lot of shit for just stating really obvious facts, right? So when Chris Wilson started with Path of Exile, right? He literally started with, I want to build my own Diablo 2, right? And that's not a bad thing. That's okay. But we have to appreciate, well, he started from the Diablo base, right? And then wanted to iterate on top and do new things on top of that, right? But the foundation is, well, he wanted to build his own Diablo 2, right? And our whole thing was, we want to go beyond that, right? Like I always look at genres, right? And so, for example, with Metroidvanias, my thing was, I did not understand why the platforming component in Metroidvanias, even though you jump around and move through this game so much, right? To me, the character controllers, the controls and so on of Super Metroid and Symphony of the Night never felt that great. Super Metroid had some really nice intricacies with the wall jumping and so on. That was cool, but even the wall jumping, I think, could have been a little bit better, right? Because even like some people that played through the entire game, sometimes they didn't get it, right? Like how exactly it works. And then with Symphony of the Night, the whole platforming aspect was just fairly simple. Like neither of these games would have actually worked as just a platformer, right? Is my point. And then with Ori, my thing was that I want to elevate that. I want the platforming component to be as good as a fucking Mario game, right? And I think we achieved that with Ori. And then with Wicked, it was this whole, let's question all these notions of things that used to be unwritten rules in the genre, right? So combat system, right? Do we have to copy the thing that Diablo has done for the past 20 years and that everybody ripped off, right? Where it's literally point and click combat system. Or should we move on to something new, right? Something where it's like, hey, no, we'll allow you to have way more control over your character. We'll allow you, like we do an animation commit combat system where once you perform an action, you actually commit to it. And you have to play methodically, right? And it's not just the spam, right? Of like, hey, I just blast spells over the screen the whole time and like wipe the entire screen and all of that, right? I think it's all of those things combined that makes it really complex, right? But that we're really proud of, that we're very close to really making sure that recipe totally works. And now it's basically about the fine-tuning, right? But if you really look at the whole, I think ultimately what will happen is that we'll create our own little subgenre, right? And what will then happen is probably the thing that happened on Ori, right? Where other studios will probably copy us, right? And then you will see Wicked likes and so on, that kind of thing. And that's cool. That's good for the industry, right? That we just see somebody does something, some other person copies it, elevates it even further. Then that person does that, right? That's how art evolves, right? Like if you look back at the Renaissance, everybody was looking at, oh my God, Caravaggio did this fucking amazing painting, right? And let's see how I can do something better than him, right? And then another person comes, oh my God, that person did this amazing thing on top of Caravaggio's work. Let's see if I can do better, right? And that's where I stand, basically. I wanna elevate the status quo, right? I looked at those things. I think people were a little bit too risk averse and not willing to change the genre. And the same thing happened with Diablo, for example, right? Like I would have loved to see what the prototype was that Josh Muscara had for Diablo 4. Because what I always heard was that he had this whole thing where it's like it was basically Diablo Souls, right? Where it was a third-person thing. Too. And then Blizzard killed it, right? Because it's like, this is not Diablo, right? But it's like, every now and then you have to have the guts to change up your shit, right? To not rely on the old formula that you had, right? Do the Beatles thing, right? Where every album sounds completely fucking different and you're exploring new things, right? Because if you don't and you just rest on your laurels, ultimately somebody will come along who will eat your lunch, right? Who actually does dare to change the whole thing and takes it all away from you, right? Look at Mario, right? Like, if we wouldn't have went from old 2D Super Mario Bros. To Mario 64 at some point, we would have never had 3D platformers, right? And we, like, the whole Miyamoto and Nintendo changed the whole industry with that, right? Because it's like Mario 64 was the point of like, okay, here's how a 3D game would work, right? Like, here's how you could move around. Here's how the camera works, right? And I think sometimes every now and then it needs that kind of rip out, right? Like, where it's just, okay, we're letting go of a lot of things, even though they were fun, even though they really worked well for us. Let's try to take it a step further, right? Like, what is the next step that we could reach?
Does it feel harder to innovate the genre as time goes on? And let's say, we mentioned Diablo, right? So you start with, Diablo, and you have these other Diablo-likes that come out, and you create basically a niche within the ARPGs come out, like isometric ARPG blasting, and then more and more and more games come out with the same style and kind of re-emphasize and reiterate upon the same system. So everyone becomes to know the genre for a lot of the same similar systems. So I guess where I'm getting at is, as time goes on, which each of these genres, Metrovania or ARPG, what have you, as time goes on, does it become harder to innovate and try to attempt something new as more and more people both become to expect certain systems within the same genre, as well as, the pretty much you're almost feel like you're carving out a new genre at that point? Like, do you feel like it's becoming harder with time, or does it become easier because of the tech, or which side of that do you stand on?
It's really easy for me because I'm insane, right? Meaning I really have a certain vision that I want to follow through, because I think ultimately that vision will lead us to new things. But there will always be detractors, right? And naysayers who just will go, no, fuck the car, I want a faster horse, right? And okay, well, at some point you just have to say, but we're not making a faster horse. We will focus on the car. And even though the car will have some issues at the start, right, and might be more annoying than a horse at the start, over time, the car will win. And that's what we're trying to do, right? That it's like, trust us. We know what we're doing here. We've went through all these things. We're a studio that went through all of this before. We know how to do it. It will just take some time, but we will perfect that recipe and we will elevate that whole thing. And by the way, that does not mean that we're doing the new thing and then the old thing should die, right? Like, I would be fucking devastated if that would happen, right? Like, I would want Diablo to be Diablo, right? And but wouldn't it have been great, right, to see something like, hey, Diablo 3, just keep that going, right? Like, why not keep that going and be okay with that, right? And like, have the game out there that is for, where you can't screen wipe and so on, and you make the perfect version of that. Meanwhile, Diablo 4 could have been the thing where it's like, hey, we try to do something completely fresh and new and go crazy. And that would have been cool. Same thing with grinding gear, right? I don't understand really why would you abandon Path of Exile 1, which was dearly loved by lots of people and lots of people now after 10 years, right? Like, that's the other thing. Path of Exile, when it first released, it wasn't that good, right? Like, because it takes time, Like, it was here's a thing that tries to be like Diablo 2, but it's not that good yet. But over time, Chris Wilson and his team got it to, oh my God, this is fucking better than what Blizzard does. That's crazy, right? But that took time. And then what I don't quite get now is, okay, now they're trying to do Path of Exile 2, which arguably is trying to do what we are doing, right? Where it's like, hey, we want an animation commit combat thing, but we're trying to use this with Diablo and so on. And right now it's funny to see kind of like, it doesn't quite work because they don't have the animation commit combat system, and it's not really tuned yet. But I would keep the Path of Exile 1 thing going, right? Because why take away the thing that people really love? Like, there's room on the market for both genres, right? And for both ways of playing, because both could be great, right?
No, I know what you mean. I think they're probably, if I had to guess, they're attempting to make a game that's more accessible to more people. I mean, we've seen that happen with multiple ARPGs in a row at this point. I think they're kind of reaching out for like, hey, we have a sub niche that is filled with so much information. It's, PoE 1 is not exactly what I would consider a game that is extremely accessible by people that are not in the genre before. So they
But it's dearly loved by people that love it, right?
loved.
So
It is dearly
yeah.
loved, absolutely. Okay, here. So I got a couple questions because you mentioned art. So I got a couple questions related to sort of what I would consider the more art side of it. So music in particular is a topic that I'm kind of curious about because what I often say is music in games. A boss fight's enjoyable. I'll put it this way: a boss fight is enjoyable, but a boss fight with good music is what I would consider memorable. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And do you have a certain importance that you're trying to weigh on the music side of the game as equally as the art side of the game? Because it seems to me like the art side of the game is like something that is probably the first thing everyone brings up. Is the game is visually very impressive, artistically very distinguished. But do you also find music to tend to be on that same level?
Music is incredibly important, and arguably music has been insanely important for Moon Studios in general, right? So if you look at the Ori games, with Ori, one of the things that I was told right from the get-go was, oh, don't do fucking story, right? Like in Blind Forest, I remember the first time I pitched a storyboard, people were just groaning, right? And we're just, oh my fucking God, now that guy wants to tell story in a platforming game. There's a reason why story has never been a thing in a Mario game, right? And all of that stuff. And then what happened was interesting, right? When Blind Forest came out and our story worked and people got really invested into our characters, and there's tons of streams where people got so invested into our characters that they cry during certain moments, right? And that's not that common that you see streamers, like these hardcore streamers, play games and they literally start bawling during the stream, right? Because something emotional is happening, right? And then for Wisps, I got the exact opposite feedback, right? That it's like, oh, the story was fantastic, do more story, right? So it's like, it's every now and then I get this win where it's like, yes, I was right? And so for Wicked, I want to elevate that even further, right? So for Ori, like we told a story, but it was always like allegorical, right? Ori is like on the outside, if you look at it, it's very much like it looks like a kid's game, right? That kind of thing, because it's like it has these fantastical creatures and so on. But at the heart of it, it tells a very human story, right? It's a story of like love, family, friendships. There's even some genocide in there and so on, right? It has really rough subjects in it. And then with Wicked, my whole thing was, oh my God, this will be fantastic because we can just story-wise go nuts and have all these human characters in there. And I would want every character in the game to have their own arc, right? So that if you, even the Smithy, Fillmore, right? That he starts out as this not super confident person, right? And then he has a family and that family had certain doubts about him, right? And then he rises to the occasion and then something dramatic happens to him and all of that stuff, right? Because the thing that always annoyed me with other ARPGs is also this whole, we don't give a fuck about our characters, right? Like if I'd ask you right now, name me 5 NPCs in the first town in Diablo 3, it's just, I can't, right?
I wouldn't be able to in D3, no.
Exactly. And so why is that the case, right? Like, wouldn't that be great if they all kind of like have a story to tell, right? And if you really care about these characters. In some ways, like I find it weird that people still remember, Griswold from Diablo 1 and Pepin and so on, right? And that kind of thing. But then in Diablo 3, I can't remember a single fucking character, right? And so that's the thing I would like to try to fix. And the thing with music is like it's almost like 50% of the thing, right? So if we're trying to tell an emotional story, back then we hit the checkpoint, right? Like I found Gareth through through ModDB or something, right? He posted some work on there and I was like, you know what? There's something there, and I want to talk to this guy. I reached out to him and he was like, yeah, I'm going to work on your little prototype and let's see what happens, right? And then like he really like was able, like we really worked well together and he really hit those beats, right? So that when we did something really emotional in the game, he was able to hit those notes, right? That it's like, wow, it gets really sad, right? Or if we wanted to be joyful, he really can play up that joyful childlike thing, right? And then with Wicked, we have so many fucking things coming up. Wicked is such a epic story. And really what you're seeing right now is basically just the start, right? It's like almost like, hey, you play through like right now what you're seeing is like the first half of Game of Thrones season 1 or something, right? Where it's like the big beats haven't actually happened yet, right? Like we are just still introducing all these characters, all these factions, all of this stuff. It takes some time for you to really get into it and so on, right? But there's so much fucking cool shit coming, right? And so with the story and with the music, right? Like we need to make sure that that stuff is great. And then same thing with once you get to bosses and so on, right? It needs to have these, oh, just as you approach the boss, there's already music that prepares you for it, right? That you get this feeling of like something big is about to happen, and then blam, and then an orchestra starts playing while you defeat the boss and so on, right? It's a hugely important piece of the puzzle.
Seems like the one of the distinguishing factors, is the art of the game, the visuals itself. So I know you found a guy that had a distinct art style, but I guess the choice of using that art style, was that out of a personal enjoyment of the art style? Was it more like this is, separate from what I've seen? You keep talking about wanting to do your own thing, kind of have your own drive. So was this a on purpose decision to pick a visual art style that almost represents, a different style of game entirely, since it's not really something we've seen used before?
It's multiple things. So first of all, it's also just a practical thing, right? Because when we started, we knew that we can't compete against the Crytek's and Naughty Dog and all of these studios that just pour, hundreds of millions of dollars into art assets and so on, right? We will not be able to compete because we're just a couple of people, even though we came from Blizzard, right? We just don't have the resources to do that, right? But what we can do is we can make fucking amazing paintings, right? And we can play to our strengths here, right? Where we can create a composition that people will find appealing, right? That could compete against other stuff on the market, but at a lower price, right? And so if you look at Ori, I think it held up pretty well, right? If I would play Ori and the Will of the Wisps right now, I still think it's a fucking beautiful game, and it's 5 years old by now, right? And you can't say that about many games that are 5 years old. So I remember playing Uncharted 2, right? And thinking, oh my God, look at this. This looks fucking amazing, right? But if you'd look at Uncharted 2 right now, just because of tech, and because of, now we have the Unreal Engine 5 and all of this stuff, right? It doesn't look impressive anymore. It's not, you wouldn't play Uncharted 2 right now going, wow, that's a really beautiful game, right? Simply because, the character models don't really hold up anymore. Everything looks kind of like puppets and so on, right? And so my thinking on this was always, we can't compete on that. What can we compete with, right? Every time I go to a museum and I see some Caravaggio paintings and so on, I'm still amazed, right? These fucking Caravaggio paintings are 500 years old, right? But because Caravaggio was a master of just color composition and so on, and his dark and light scheme and so on, that kind of thing, right? It still looks super fucking impressive, right? So that was always the thing that I was shooting for, right? Like that, just basically like make our games look like a fucking Caravaggio painting, right? And really make it look like a painting. Because if we try to do something technically impressive with just let's throw a shit ton of polygons at it, then we will fail that, right? Like if you try to compete on that front, we can't. And then the other thing I don't like right now is that if I would take a screenshot right now without the HUD of Diablo 4 and Path of Exile 2 and show it to normal people on the street, right? I don't think they could tell a difference. Simply because what happened in the games industry is that everybody went to PBR workflows and so on, right? And everything became fairly generic, right? And they're all using kind of like these, asset libraries and blah, blah, blah. And it all kind of like starts looking the same and feeling very static, right? And I don't love that, right? I think it's much better if you go with something where it's like, hey, for every fucking screen of the game, we worry about the composition, right? We look at what's the color composition of that. Is everything readable? Could you frame every single frame of the game, right? Instead of just, everything looks realistic, right? Everything looks how it should in real life, right? And like literally you have these lighting and material models that are like, hey, we're trying to mimic real life. And it looks decent, right? Like you can very quickly, even if you're somebody who's super inexperienced, right? You can very quickly throw something together in Unreal Engine 5 that looks fairly impressive, right? But it will look generic. It will look like all this other stuff that everybody else is doing, right? Here's this really nice cave and I put some holes in, some lights into it, right? And now it's nicely lit and so on. but it will look like anything else on the market, right? And I think we're seeing a lot of that. And what I would always want is that even if you see a small postage stamp screenshot of one of our games, you will be able to tell that those are our games because of the way we use colors, the way we use lights, the way we do our stuff, right? Like it has to look and feel like a Moon Studios game. And I think we are hitting that because the response generally on terms of visuals for our games is usually
Very well
extremely
received,
positive.
From the studio side of it, from the Moon Studio side of it, and back in 2023, you made a tweet something along the lines of, "No Rest for the Wicked was going to be make or break for you. That your upcoming project, that was going to fit in. I think the second half of that tweet was like PoE and Diablo were coming for you or whatever in that genre. You made a very clear statement that like this was a big deal for the studio. Do you still feel this way?"
Oh, that is absolutely the case. We're risking everything right now. We are absolutely risking the whole studio with all of this right now, right? Because, and by the way, the same thing was true with Blind Forest. If Blind Forest wouldn't have been a hit, we would have been bankrupt. If Will of the Wisps wouldn't have worked, we would have been bankrupt, right? We would have immediately been wiped off the floor. And the same thing is true with No Rest for the Wicked. If No Rest for the Wicked doesn't work, right? We're not a huge publisher. We're a small indie studio. We rely on people believing in what we're doing and supporting us. And if they don't and we fuck it up, then that means, well, we'll be wiped off the face of the earth, right? And that's just what it is. And that, I do think, to some degree, gives people the personal responsibility of like, hey, we really have to make sure this product works. And that we deliver a product that really is fucking great. Otherwise, that's it, right? We don't have that kind of like cushion of, hey, we make a huge flop and doesn't matter because there's huge backing behind us or something, right? That's not the case. It's that we are playing a very risky game here, right? But I think we have good cards. So if I'd be a betting man, I would bet on us. But yeah, we're betting at very high stakes right now.
You're putting your money where your mouth is, basically, is what it sounds like. And, speaking of that, one of the last questions here, I won't hold you too long. I know you got family to get to here. One of the last questions for you is something I respected in your overview of the Breach update, the other 25-minute kind of overview stream that you guys did there, is you mentioned that you had to buy your rights back from the publisher. So when I saw that, I thought, oh, that's interesting. You guys are going, like, you're fully committing to your project. Like, you fully believe in this. You're buying all the rights back and everything. You're all in. So I was hoping to hear, what was the story that, why did that happen? Like, what ended up happening where you had to do that?
Yeah. So let me explain it to you. Our publisher for No Rest for the Wicked initially was Private Division, right? And Private Division was a subsidiary of Take-Two Interactive. Take-Two Interactive just looked at the numbers at some point, right? And was like, look, why are we doing this whole Private Division thing, right? Because GTA 6 will come out. It will generate billions and billions of dollars for us every year, right? Who gives a fuck? Even if No Rest for the Wicked would make them hundreds of millions of dollars, it doesn't matter. It's an accounting error, right? It's like it doesn't matter to them, right? So what they decided is we will sell off Private Division. And then we were in the difficult spot of like, shit, what do we do now, right? Like, because we didn't want to get sold off, right? And we didn't want to just become owned by some other thing. That happened to Blizzard back then, right? And I don't think that was a great thing. I think that was one of the bad things that happened to Blizzard Entertainment early on, that they had to sell off to some subsidiary, to something, right? To some publisher or something. And then they got sold again and again. And ultimately they ended up on Activision Blizzard, right? With under Activision's belt. And at some point, that is always the death nail, right? Because at some point, some founders leave, there's some disagreements. Like there's some, hey, we need to make a whole bunch of money, right? So we need to make $60 horse skins and so on. And these decisions come down and it's just, fuck, that goes way against what the actual community wants, right? And so I've always resisted that. Obviously, by the way, I mean, during COVID and so on, right? There was so much money flying around, right? And we got tons of buyout offers, right? And like, other parties that wanted to purchase us, right? And I've always been afraid of that because I've lived through the 90s, right? Where, hey, this and that studio got bought by EA. And how long did it take until those studios were killed, right? Like I still remember Westwood being bought by EA, right? When they were at the top of their game, right? And it took a couple of years and they were dead, right? Same thing happened with Bullfrog, right? And all of those things. Maxis, when they made SimCity. And then, like they were all shot dead, right? And so I was always really scared of that, right? And frankly, I'm not that easily persuaded by money, right? So if somebody comes to me with like a big sack of cash, I'm like, that doesn't change my life, right? Like I look at it in terms of the happiness factor, right? Would that actually make my life happier right now? I'm fucking 41 years old. I don't have a driver's license. I couldn't even buy a fucking car to be happy or something, right? Like I'm not into that, right? Like the thing that I want to do, that I dedicated my life to, is I want to make the greatest fucking video games out there, right? And so I think we're doing that. If you look at the Ori series, if you look at No Rest for the Wicked, I think what I would want to people to know is that, hey, we made some of the greatest fucking games out there, and then we did our thing, we contributed something valuable to the industry, and people love playing our games, and then that's it, right? Like, I think that's the best you could ask for. And so what happened with Wicked there was, well, we got told that, right? Like, Wicked released, and then, we had a meeting with Private Division, and they were very kind about all of this, right? They just explained the situation to us, that financially it doesn't make any sense anymore for them to do this, right? And that they gave us some time to handle the situation, and we negotiated with them and basically found a way to just purchase all the rights back, because we believe in Wicked. We think we have a really hot iron in the oven here, right? We think we have a game that could compete with the heaviest hitters on the market, even though we're this small 90-person team compared to From Software that has hundreds of people, compared to Grinding Gear Games that has hundreds of people now, compared to Blizzard that literally has thousands of people on their games, right? But I think we are one of the best studios out there in terms of what we are doing, right? In terms of just delivering the kind of thing that we're doing. And if we are allowed to keep going on that, I think we can create some magic that will be very hard for people to replicate. I think that's already been true with Ori, right? Like, literally, Electronic Arts even opened up a studio to try to copy Ori, right? They made some game called Fae or something, and try to copy that. Even Insomniac did a game called Song of the Deep or something like that, right? Where they tried to kind of copy some of that Ori success, and then found out, hey, it's actually really fucking hard to make a good Metroidvania, right? And so even with what we have right now with Wicked, right? Like, we released Breach, and it had some balance issues. I think we now fixed that, right? Like, if you look at Hotfix 1 and Hotfix 2, we now got it in a pretty good spot. If you think a little bit further, right, with where we will be with Hotfix 3 and Patch 1 and Patch 2 and blah, 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 right? I think we'll be in an extremely good spot. We'll be extremely competitive. And I think what will happen very soon now is that people will look at Path of Exile, they will look at Diablo, they will look at the Souls games, and they will compare and then see, well, these guys are fucking crazy. They're really pushing super hard. And they're really creating all of this insane stuff. And this is really changing the genre to some degree, right? And I just want players to have fun with that. But anyway, so that's what happened, right? We just got dealt that card. And as with everything in life, right, you just have to roll with the punches, right? That came really as an unexpected thing to us, right? But we just handled it. And that took us some time to figure out. That was the shitty thing, right? That we got a lot of really negative reviews by people thinking that we abandoned Wicked and so on, even though we were literally just, like NDA'd and couldn't talk about what is happening right now behind the scenes and so on, right? Sure. And, but the internet is a harsh mistress, right? Like, if you are not completely open and don't talk about something and are not completely transparent with your plans and so on, people will be very harsh with your products, right? But ultimately, look, I think ultimately, if we just release an extremely good product, all of that will be forgotten, right? Nobody cares at some point, right? It's just what's your last thing that you developed, right? That's what you'll be judged on.
The next question I want to ask is in order to get to where you want to be, it sounds like you really want to make an impact. Like, if I'm hearing correctly, it's like your drive is mainly you want to make an impact in this genre and move the genre forward and be a contributing factor. So when other games come out, people are looking like, okay, this is a piece that was taken, inspired from, derivative from No Rest for the Wicked, contributed that effectively to the genre.
I want us to be able to take the risks that other companies are too afraid to make.
Sure. Okay. So what do you need to do in the next coming months in order to move that particular vision you're describing forward? What's your next few months look like?
My next few months look like this. First of all, we are assessing what happened here, right? Like, why we got some negative reviews at the start, because that should never happen again. That's crazy. And that was a really quick turnaround. Like, that's on us. That's completely my responsibility. I should have seen that coming. But I think we're in a fairly good spot now. Now it's just, like bringing more hotfixes out, balancing, blah, 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 making sure that Breach lands the way we wanted it to land. That's step one. Step two is just really assessing all the feedback, right? Everything that is out there right now, how are people playing, looking at all the data, and making sure that the audience that we have now, right, that we really tune the game so it works for everybody, right? Because right now at the start we tuned it in a way that works for us, but not necessarily for the Breach, right? We tuned it in a way that works for us in the studio because we're really good at the game, but we kind of like overshot a little bit, right? Because for a lot of people it was too difficult, and some systems didn't quite work the way we wanted them to. And then the next upcoming updates is, I think co-op is the next huge thing that people will be really passionate about, because you still can only play single player in Wicked, right? But once co-op comes out, I think that will be a game changer for a lot of people, simply because playing together is always super fun, right? And the way we do multiplayer in Wicked is also completely different than what Diablo does and Souls games do and so on. That's another thing where I never understood why that has not been pushed forward, right? I understand if Diablo 1 comes out and you literally just have a system where, multiplayer is really just, you can temporarily invite a guest, right? But how in the fucking world is that's still the norm 20 years later, right? That's fucking crazy. That's insane, right? So what I always wanted from an RPG is that it should really feel like a fucking D&D campaign, right? Me and you, and let's say me and you and Rex and Scissoren and whatever, right? That we play together, and building a realm together should be as satisfying as you leveling a character up, right? So that you're not just proud of the character that you built, but you're also proud of how far you pushed the realm, how you upgraded everything together, right? That you really work together well as a party, right?
Sure.
And there's games in the past, I recently played Secret of Mana with my son. That's a fucking 30-year-old game, right? And recently I asked him what are his favorite games now, right? After we played Zelda and Secret of Mana and all these things, and he ranked Secret of Mana as number one, right?
That's on Super Nintendo, right?
Just because that's a Super Nintendo game, and it was one of the first action adventures that you could play together, and I think it was that we just worked together as a party, as a group, right? Where I played the little mage girl, right, and he played the boy who swings with his sword and so on, right, and I supported him during fights and so on, right, and I think that really worked for him. And I think that's the kind of thing that I want to get into Wicked, right? Like in Wicked, the multiplayer works in a way where it's like, hey, you create a realm and then you invite other people to the realm, but now the realm is not yours anymore. It doesn't matter that you created it. You're now sharing it with all these other people, and everybody can contribute to that realm, right? I want these moments where you play with Rex, for example, right? And then Rex just grinds through the night and you already went to sleep, right? And then you get up in the morning and check the realm, and it's like, fuck you, Rex, you already level 21 and you already have a better house than me and you already have all this stuff. But then you find out, hey, Rex actually left some really good fucking gear in the community chest on the realm, right, for you. Sure. And these kind of moments where it's like, hey, that's really sweet, thank you, right? And that's what I never got from these games, right? It's still just always this whole, if we want to play multiplayer together, somebody is just temporarily invited as a guest, right? And that never creates that feeling of like, we are a fucking party. We rely on one another. I'm a warrior. You are a mage, right? And the other guy is an archer. And the next guy is a necromancer or something, right? And we play together. And we really went on a journey together instead of just, so we played a game and like temporarily invited you and then we all went our merry ways, right? And you played on your single player server and I play on mine and that was it.
So do you get inspired by, because what I hear when you say this, I play a lot of survival games, stuff like Valheim. So when I hear this, are you getting inspired a bit by that genre too? Do you want to mix a little bit of like the survival style realm with the ARPG, mindset as one, kind of put them together a little bit? Or
well, here's a little secret for you. I never really got the chance to play Valheim, so I don't know exactly what they're doing. Sure. I just look at it from what am I passionate about? What are the feelings and experiences that I would like to have, right? Sure. And then I just try to get closer to that. So especially with something like Diablo and so on, and with the Wicked idea, right? Like the whole thing was just I had a dream of how what ARPGs should evolve into back in the early 2000s when I played Diablo 2, and that thing never happened, right? Like ARPGs turned into a completely different thing. And so I wanted to finally realize that vision, right? And that's where all of that is coming from. I just want to finally fulfill these dreams that I had, right? For like, hey, here's how I think a Metroidvania, what would make for a really interesting Metroidvania, or here's where I think the ARPG genre could go, right? And then let's see if we can realize that, right? And that's super encouraging and like gratifying, right? If you can really make that work. If you just start with an idea in your head and then you make it work and it really works, right? That's super satisfying.
I gotta say, I think it's really cool you play games with your kid because that's how I got into gaming myself. I watched my dad play Super Metroid, and then the first game I ever touched was the first game I ever saw was Descent by Interplay on the PC, and then it was watching my dad play Super Metroid, and then the first game I ever played was my mom left. And he said, "Okay, well, I'll take down the game that I never played because Mom's gone. It was Street Fighter. And he handed me a controller and then kicked my ass for like 30 minutes on Street Fighter. So, I can always appreciate when a dad spends time gaming with the son. Also,
I would like to generally even have that for Wicked, right? Like, so when people share a realm together, wouldn't it be great if families share a realm together, right? Where even the mom plays and just plays a whatever healer or farm stuff, right, and so on, or just becomes a mage in the background, right, and that kind of thing. Like, however people want to play Wicked, right, I want to enable all those role-playing fantasies, right? If you want to be a fucking Grim Reaper with a big scythe and that kind of thing and just mow stuff down, cool. We should enable that experience for you, right? Same thing if you just want to be a merchant or something, or a woodcutter or something, right? If you want to be the lumberjack of a realm and just cut down all the trees and get all the wood, and then, well, nothing has respawned in the realm yet, so you basically own the wood and now you control the prices in the realm, right? Like, that thing would be fucking crazy. That would be so cool.
Yeah, that does add on one other question, because it reminded me of something I heard from one of the interviews where you're talking about archetypes, where you were talking about like warrior and ranger, and you said you hadn't implemented it yet, but there was a concept kind of like a skill tree or something. You wanted to basically do an archetype. So I was is there any more you can tell me about that concept by any chance? Do you have, is this just a rough idea in your head, or do you have anything kind of fleshed out, or where's that at?
No, I have the system already worked out, but it's not implemented yet. So basically, I mean, I'm basically taking a lot of inspiration on this from Final Fantasy Tactics. I always loved Matsuno's games, and I think he really hit it out of the park with Final Fantasy Tactics and that whole jobs and ability system. And I think that would fit perfectly on Wicked, right? Right now we have the rune system and so on, and one of the issues that we have is we have 150 fucking weapons in the game. But right now, you wouldn't know it, right? Like, you have to stumble across them. It's just RNG, right? Like, you would not know exactly which weapons exist and how to properly build your class. Right now, you need to look at build guides and, other YouTube streamers and blah, blah, right? Or Twitch streamers and so on, right? And then talk to one another, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think for something like Wicked, where there's this level of complexity, I would want to have that in the game, right? So that there is, hey, here's the paladin class, and it has these abilities, right? And it uses these weapons, and then you unlock that stuff, right? And that's how it'll work in the future. So that I think we're trying to move a little bit away from the attribute system that we have right now, more towards classes and abilities, and then make that super satisfying, right? So that you could literally switch from, hey, I'm playing a paladin, and I unlocked all of that stuff, and now I want to try a spell sword, and here you go. And now you need to do these things, right? And unlock all of that and so on. I think that will have huge ramifications on retention, because I recently replayed through Final Fantasy Tactics because of just research, right? I wanted to see exactly how would I implement that in Wicked, right? And I just couldn't put the game down unless I had all the fucking classes unlocked and everything mastered and so on, right? And I think the same thing will happen with Wicked if we implement this, right? Because right now also the thing is, like, we have a soft class system, which I like. I like that you're not being forced into one specific way to play, right? We give you a lot of freedom there to come up with the kind of class that you would want to play. But at the same time, I do think there's too many ways right now where you can kind of like screw yourself over a little bit, right?
Sure.
Like, if you play and you start with weapons that scale with strength, but then you actually want to use the claws and they scale with dex, well, you need to respec already, right?
It's exactly
that
the
kind
situation
of thing.
I'm in, yeah.
Exactly, right? So, and I think that's the thing where I would like to make a change so that it feels just, we give you less rope to hang yourself with, right? Because the people who understand these kind of systems, they're good, they don't have a problem, right? But the people who are fresh to the genre and so on, and to that kind of system, they could completely break their build, right? By just, hey, I leveled some points into int and some points into strength and a little bit in dex, simply because I assumed that would work for my build, but it didn't, and now you have a screwed up build, right? That's the thing I think we need to fix a little bit.
Something that could be interesting about the skill tree too, just as I'm thinking about it, is like it gives you potentially like a stretch goal. Like at the moment, I feel like the game, in order to continue to play the game, your inspiration is like, I want to explore, I want to see what's around the next corner, I want to see what the next boss fight is, I want to see the next cinematic, I want to know what happens, right? But sometimes in these games, like you're mentioning, where it's like you couldn't stop until you unlock everything, when you have like a skill tree or like a passive tree or something, you're like, okay, I can get to here. At level 30, I unlock like the final, move or what have you. It gives you a goal in your mind where it's like, I'm going to keep playing because I want to unlock this, so that could be
kind of master every single fucking class that's in there, right?
Exactly. You want to unlock the things instead of just like get 3 more points on strength or what have you, so I get a little bit more damage. Because it's not like I know the next chest around the corner that there's going to be that really cool weapon that I can't wait to try. I can't. There's no thing. That's the
thing that we're doing. That's the thing that we're doing, right? We'll have factions in general that you can join, right? And then, hey, if I join this faction, that covers Paladin and Spell Sword and these other things that fit that, right? And then we make it easier for you to also target farm the gear and so on that you would need for that, right? So that you would have little quests and so on to complete for that stuff. And bigger things that you could do, right? And like, hey, wouldn't it be cool to also have a full story behind those factions and so on, right? That kind of thing, so that it really becomes this super addictive, really cool, like, hey, if I want to build a paladin, I know exactly how that works, right? I just have to put in the effort and so on, but then I can master fucking everything, and I spend tons of hours, but now I have a character that has mastered everything, and I can play every single play style, and it's great,
Okay, so final question for you, Thomas, then I'll let you go. So people that were watching this interview here, can you give them a quick sales pitch as to the people that maybe were listening, they're interested, they're like, okay, it's an indie studio, they got a lot of pressure on them, had a big success before, bought back their rights, now they're onto a new genre, okay, I'm behind them. Can you give a little bit of a quick, here's what our game is, here's why to try it out, here's where we're going? An elevator pitch for the people.
I would like everybody who's at all into Zelda, Souls, Diablo, and so on to just give it a try, right? Because I think there's already, even with the latest updates and so on, there will be something for you there, right? But the elevator pitch is and always has been, right, that we want to elevate the combat system so that ultimately we have better combat than Dark Souls. I think we're not quite there yet, but I see the light at the end of the tunnel, how I get it there, right? And the PvP stuff that we'll be introducing will help us also to get there. Because ultimately with Dark Souls, I think one of the fundamental problems, and that's something that you can't really solve, is you have a 3D, third-person game where you have to constantly control the camera. So it's really hard to pull off really cool specials, right? In Wicked, I can literally give you 8 specials on your character and make that fucking fantastic, right? Like really give you tons and tons of variety in your moves and so on. Similar to a fighting game, right? Where I could set it up like Street Fighter, right? Where it's like, here's my 8 openers that I could play with and so on. So that's combat, right? For the exploration thing, we are trying to cut down that unwritten rule of every single world in an ARPG has to be procedurally generated, because I think that has been a fucking bunch of hogwash, right? If you play through these games, right, my experience playing through Loot Golain for the 15th time is not as good as it was the first time around, right? It's not like, hey, you randomize the map a little bit. Okay, the thing that is here is now there. The thing that used to be a rock is now a statue. But the flow of it is very much the same, right? We are not technically at a point yet where you can use procedural generation to create extremely interesting level design, right? And so the way we approach it from the exploration perspective is that, hey, we came from 10 years of building Ori. We know how to create a fucking world that you want to explore, right? And so that's super important to us, that we really handcraft every single fucking inch that you traverse, right? And then we randomize on top of that, right? Like then we have, okay, but you never know what encounter you'll have, right? Which faction took over this world, right? Or this particular zone right now. so that it really feels different there. Then we'll also have quests in there, right? Where it's like, oh, I retraversed in this zone, and suddenly this whole quest appeared where I was kidnapped by these bandits, and now they dragged me into another thing, and so on, and stuff that wouldn't have happened if you wouldn't have re-explored. So that exploration aspect, from that it's as good as a Zelda game, that's also really important to us. In terms of retention, we want to land on that Diablo thing, right? Where it's like, this is literally a game that you could put hundreds of hours in it and still find new stuff, right? And to some degree, by the way, that has already worked, right? Like even with we released an early access launch, basically just the first act, right? Which was like these, 4 zones or something, right? And it wasn't that much content. Still, we saw lots of players putting 100, 200, 300 hours into the game. And even now with Breach, right? Like, if you really play it, right? Like, if you really go through everything and try to make multiple builds and so on, you will very easily be able to put like 200, 300 hours or something into Wicked already. So it will be that kind of game. And then I also want to tackle the social element, right? I want to craft a world that you just really want to live in, right? That isn't just a dispenser, right? Or isn't just okay, here's your dopamine drop every single second or something, but you come back to it because the world is fucking intriguing, right? And because you just enjoy playing through the world and roaming around the world and finding new things and seeing what the fucking crazy folks at Moon tried to put in again, right? And so on. We wanted to really feel like a world that was handcrafted with love, with care, right? And that you come back to it because it's just fucking well designed, right? It's not some procedural slob. It's like, this has been handcrafted by artists and designers for you to enjoy, and they're constantly putting new stuff in, and it's just the best, right? That's the goal.
There you go, everyone. That is the elevator pitch for No Rest for the Wicked. So if you want to try it out, it is on Steam in early access right now. And I believe it works on Steam Deck as well, correct?
It works on Steam Deck. Obviously, we're still always working on optimizations. There's one big optimization, by the way, that we wanted to get in for kind of like lower spec hardware, but that was a little bit too risky for the Breach launch. So that will still happen. That should have a really nice impact on any machine that is lower spec, because we're getting lots of reports still from people that have like a 980 or a 1080 graphics card or something, right? And it's like, Jesus Christ, guys, by now this card is like 9 years old, you know? Like, we will try to optimize the shit out of everything, but at some point it's also, you know, like, maybe get a better machine. But there's still really good optimizations coming, and yeah, on Steam Deck right now, you will get about 30 to 50 frames or so. But it's a pretty good experience. I played through the entire game that way. So it's pretty okay.
Well, Thomas, hey, thanks for your time, man. It was a really interesting interview, actually one of the more interesting ones I've had. So I appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Oh, that's great to hear. Absolutely. Thanks for having me.